in the quiet hush of a late Italian evening, long before the world knew his name. A young Leonardo would sit beneath a dim oil lamp, studying the slow dance of shadows on the stone walls. He believed shadows whispered secrets, that every curve of light carried a code left behind by the universe, waiting for a curious soul to read it. He often wandered the peaceful outskirts of Vinci, his hometown, walking barefoot over cool earth, feeling the ground as if it were a living map beneath him. The breeze would brush past the olive trees, carrying scents of early spring, and Leonardo imagined that even the wind was trying to tell him how the world worked. As a child, he would lie in open fields at night, gazing at the stars while the grass cradled his back like an old friend. He didn't see stars the way others did. He saw thousands of tiny lanterns hung by invisible hands, guiding dreamers across the endless sky. He wondered who lit them and why they never fell. Leonardo spent hours watching rivers curl around rocks, memorizing the patterns of flowing water. He believed that water was the handwriting of nature, smooth, soft, but stronger than stone. In its motion, he saw answers to questions he hadn't even learned to ask yet. Sometimes he would sit in the village square, sketching faces and gestures of passing strangers. But he didn't draw what he saw. He drew the stories behind their eyes, the quiet emotions they carried, the unspoken things that made them human. Even then, he understood, invention begins where emotion and curiosity meet. On warm nights, he listened to crickets echoing through the dark hills. Their rhythm, steady and sure, reminded him of gears turning, signals repeating, systems forming. He wasn't yet an inventor. But something inside him, something calm and ancient, was already aligning with the clockwork pulse of the universe. He often visited a small workshop in Vinci where old tools were kept, rusted chisels, cracked hammers, worn-out measuring rods. Though the tools were simple, Leonardo treated them like sacred relics. He would touch them gently, imagining the hands that used them, the ideas they once shaped. Leonardo learned early that silence was its own kind of teacher. In the stillness of night when everyone else slept, he would sit near his window listening to the faint hum of life outside. The whisper of trees, the distant bark of a dog, the soft rustle of someone turning in their sleep. Every sound, no matter how ordinary, held meaning for him. He grew fascinated with birds, watching them glide effortlessly across the sky. Their wings seemed like perfect machines, engineered by something far wiser than man. He sketched them in dozens of poses, trying to decode the mechanics hidden in beauty. Sometimes his imagination carried him so far that he forgot the world around him. He once followed a butterfly through the woods for nearly an hour, studying how its wings fluttered in a pattern that felt almost musical. He later claimed that even this tiny creature had taught him something about motion. When storms rolled in across the hills, Leonardo wasn't afraid. Instead, he would stand outside, letting the wind tug at his hair while thunder rumbled above. To him, storms were grand performances, nature revealing its raw architecture, its power, its rules. In the dim hours before dawn, he often dreamed of machines that did not exist yet, machines with wings, machines that could dive into water like fish, machines that could lift heavy loads with ease. These dreams felt less like imagination and more like memories borrowed from the future. His mother noticed the distant look in his eyes, the way he seemed to listen to things others couldn't hear. She would gently place a hand on his shoulder and remind him to rest, but Leonardo would smile, saying softly that his mind was too awake for sleep. He grew intrigued by the way human hands moved, how fingers curled, how wrists bent, how knuckles shifted. He believed hands were the universe's most expressive tools, capable of creating, destroying, comforting, and dreaming all at once. When he wasn't drawing or wandering, Leonardo helped an elderly carpenter in the village. The carpenter taught him patience, the slow art of shaping wood, the quiet pride of building something real. The smell of fresh-cut timber stayed with him for life, a scent that reminded him of possibility. At night, after the carpenter closed shop, Leonardo would sneak back inside to study the unfinished pieces, chairs missing legs, wheels missing spokes, toys missing faces. He didn't see them as broken, he saw them as puzzles, invitations to think differently. He often carried a small leather notebook, scribbling thoughts before they slipped away. The notebook held everything: diagrams, questions, half-formed dreams, theories about stars and rivers and wind. Later in life, this habit would lead him to create thousands of pages of genius. Yet for all his brilliance, he remained gentle. He cared deeply for animals, often buying caged birds just so he could release them. He said freedom made creatures beautiful, and perhaps he meant humans too. The villagers sometimes whispered that Leonardo was strange, but not unkind. They saw the way he stared at the world, with wonder, not judgment, and though they didn't understand him, they knew he was destined for something extraordinary. And so, on one peaceful evening, as candles flickered in the windows of Vinci and the night wrapped quietly around the hills, young Leonardo da Vinci stood beneath the stars once more. Eyes softened, heart steady, mind wide open, ready to follow the paths of light that only he could see. Years later, when Leonardo stepped into the bustling city of Florence for the very first time, he felt as if he had entered a living dream. Streets alive with voices, merchants calling out, musicians playing soft strings under balconies, and the warm glow of lanterns stretching across cobblestone paths like melted gold. Everything moved with a rhythm, and Leonardo absorbed it quietly, as though the city itself were whispering a welcome meant only for him. He wandered through narrow alleys filled with the scent of fresh bread and wet stone after rain, pausing to watch painters at work, brush strokes gliding like calm waves across canvas. Their colors fascinated him, but even more fascinating were the tiny decisions in every movement, the pauses, the hesitations, the gentle confidence that came only from patience and love for craft. Leonardo found himself drawn to the Arno River, flowing lazily through Florence like a silver ribbon. At sunset, he would sit by the water, sketchbook in hand, tracing the reflections of buildings trembling softly on the river's surface. He believed the river kept secrets of time, memories of who walked these banks centuries before, dreams of those yet to come. Inside the workshop of Verrocchio, the great master artist, Leonardo discovered a world where imagination became real. Tools hung like instruments, pigments rested like powdery treasure, and marble blocks stood tall and silent, waiting for hands brave enough to reveal the shapes hidden inside them. Leonardo felt a quiet shiver of destiny each time he stepped across the threshold. He wasn't the most talkative apprentice, but he was the most observant. He studied Verrocchio's every move, the way the master held a chisel, the direction he breathed when striking stone, the small smile that touched his lips when a sculpture's face began to take form. Leonardo collected these details like stars to store in the sky of his mind. When he mixed paint, he treated it as a sacred ritual. The colors reminded him of emotions, deep blues like longing, warm ochres like comfort, and shimmering golds like fleeting hope. He believed that every painting should feel alive, not just look alive, and so he whispered stories to the pigments as if waking them gently. Late at night, when the workshop fell silent, Leonardo would stay behind, lingering in the dim candlelight. He sketched endlessly, hands, wings, gears, rivers, storms, expressions, anything his mind wished to understand. The other apprentices thought he worked too much, but to Leonardo, this was peace. His mind felt most alive in stillness. One evening he noticed how a candle flame leaned toward an open window, flickering as a breeze slipped into the room. That simple motion ignited something inside him, a curiosity about air itself, how it moved, why it danced, how it could lift a bird's wing or push a storm across the sky. This small moment would one day inspire inventions far ahead of his time. Leonardo often visited the city markets at dawn, when the world felt gentle and half asleep. He watched people set up their stalls, their hands moving with graceful routine. He believed every person had a rhythm, a pattern to their life, and he studied these patterns like clues in a grand puzzle of human nature. He once stopped to watch a man repairing a broken lute. The way the man tuned each string with careful precision fascinated Leonardo. The sound of each pitch, rising, falling, settling, it felt like a metaphor for life, always adjusting, always seeking balance. Leonardo sketched the instrument, imagining machines that could create music without hands. His dreams grew bigger as his understanding of the world deepened. He dreamed of bridges that could fold like paper, of machines that could walk like humans, of underwater contraptions that allowed people to breathe beneath the surface, just as fish did. These dreams scared some, amazed others, but for Leonardo they were simply possibilities waiting patiently. Despite the brilliance growing within him, Leonardo remained humble. He often shared bread with beggars near the river, listening to their stories, their struggles, their small joys. He believed wisdom didn't belong only to scholars, it lived in everyone, even in those the world overlooked. During quiet evenings, he would write in his notebooks in mirror script, backwards, flowing right to left. It wasn't to keep secrets, he simply found it natural, a comfortable rhythm for his mind. When people asked him why, he just smiled and said, "Sometimes thoughts look better this way." He became fascinated with anatomy, studying the way muscles pulled and bones hinged. But he didn't see bodies as cold structures, he saw them as miracles shaped by nature. In every tendon, he saw intention. In every joint, he saw harmony. In every heartbeat, he saw design. Rainy nights were Leonardo's favorite. He loved how the city softened under the sound of rainfall, how torches hissed in the wet air, how rooftops shimmered with silver droplets. Sitting by his window, he would imagine machines that could capture the energy of storms, storing lightning like a wild animal tamed by innovation. Sometimes he felt lonely, but not in a sad way. More like the world was too vast for one lifetime, too full of ideas to explore. Yet he embraced that feeling, letting it guide him deeper into curiosity, deeper into creation. He often paused to admire simple things. A leaf spiraling in the breeze, a drop of dew trembling on a petal, a child's laughter echoing through narrow streets. To him, beauty wasn't grand or loud. It was gentle, quiet, and everywhere. In Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo finally sculpted his first piece, a small angel meant for a larger painting. The moment Verrocchio saw it, he stepped back, stunned. The angel's expression was so serene, so full of breath, that it felt alive. Word spread across Florence that the young apprentice possessed a rare gift, and on a soft, peaceful night, as Florence settled into sleep and lanterns dimmed one by one, Leonardo stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. The same city that once felt too big, too loud, too bright. Now it felt like home. The stars above shimmered quietly, as if acknowledging him. In their glow, Leonardo whispered to himself that this was only the beginning, that the world had not yet seen what he was meant to create. As Leonardo's curiosity widened, so did the doors of his imagination, opening into a realm the world was not yet ready to understand. He began sketching designs for machines that seemed almost mythical, contraptions shaped like dragonflies, gliders with wings broader than any bird, and devices that looked like they could fold the wind itself. To others, these sketches felt impossible, but to Leonardo, they were simply glimpses of a future he believed humanity could one day touch. One quiet evening, while the rest of the workshop slept, he stood on a balcony overlooking the twinkling lights of Florence. The air carried a soft warmth, and the faint hum of nighttime voices drifted upward. Leonardo closed his eyes and imagined what it would feel like to lift off the ground, to leave the rooftops behind, to glide through the night sky with the grace of a falcon. This dream would push him for decades, fueling designs of flying machines that defied the limits of his era. He spent countless nights observing birds, studying each beat of their wings. He noticed how their feathers adjusted subtly with every gust of wind, how their bodies twisted with perfect precision mid-flight. He believed nature held the answers to every invention if one only took the time to watch patiently and listen deeply. One afternoon, Leonardo crafted his first detailed blueprint of the ornithopter, a machine meant to fly by flapping wings, powered by human strength. He drew every gear with care, labeling each part with backwards handwriting, imagining the day this sketch would become a real machine touching the sky. Florence had never seen such an idea, and even he knew people might laugh. But he didn't mind. Genius always began as something strange. During his studies, Leonardo became fascinated by the way light reflected off surfaces. He would place glass jars of water near sunlight, watching how beams bent and stretched through them, forming rainbows on the walls. This simple experiment stirred questions that would one day inspire inventions connected to optics, primitive lenses, early concepts of cameras, and ways to understand vision itself. On long walks outside the city, Leonardo carried a small pack of tools, using them to measure distances, angles, and slopes. He believed that understanding the Earth's shape and behavior was essential for building structures that stood the test of time. Many of his sketches from these walks later influenced designs for bridges, some elegant enough to span great rivers with surprising simplicity. Once, he stopped beside an abandoned mill wheel, its wooden paddles broken, its gears worn. He studied it quietly, imagining how water's natural force could power machines larger than anyone dreamed. That night, by candlelight, he drew early visions of hydraulic inventions, machines that used flowing water to lift weights, turn gears, and even automate work. These were seeds of ideas that would blossom centuries later. Leonardo also became captivated by human emotion. He believed that every invention must serve the human spirit, not just human needs. He often sketched faces of people lost in thought, merchants worried about tomorrow, mothers calming children, travelers longing for home. In these expressions, he saw stories, and in those stories he saw reasons to create. As Florence thrived with creativity, Leonardo began experimenting with war machines, not out of love for destruction, but out of curiosity for how force worked. He designed armored vehicles shaped like rounded shells, capable of moving soldiers safely across battlefields. Although these inventions were far ahead of their time, he hoped they might someday reduce casualties by protecting lives, not ending them. One moonlit night, Leonardo ventured into the countryside to test a small model of a flying device he had built. It wasn't large enough to carry a person, but as he released it from a hilltop, it glided downward elegantly before settling softly on the grass. The moment filled him with childlike joy, proof that his ideas weren't merely dreams, but possibilities. Despite his brilliance, Leonardo often felt like an outsider. His mind ran ahead of the world, leaving him navigating a space between what was known and what could be. But instead of letting this distance isolate him, he embraced it. He understood that true genius required solitude, a place where ideas could bloom freely without the noise of doubt. In quiet hours, he experimented with mechanisms inspired by music. The turning of gears reminded him of melodies, each cog representing a note in a grand symphony of invention. He once designed a self-playing drum system, wooden arms that struck rhythm without a musician's hand. It wasn't widely noticed, but Leonardo didn't care. Innovation wasn't about applause, it was about possibility. He often imagined a giant mechanical knight, one that could lift its arms, turn its head, even walk using a complex series of pulleys and gears. This robot concept was centuries ahead of its time. Leonardo built small prototypes, fascinated by the idea of creating motion from stillness. Though the world wasn't yet ready for robotics, he sketched every detail anyway, knowing someday someone would understand. There were days when Florence felt overwhelming. Too many voices, too much noise. On those days, Leonardo escaped to the tranquil hills where wildflowers dotted the fields. He would lie on the grass, watching clouds drift effortlessly, shapes shifting like ideas in motion. In the silence of nature, he recharged his spirit and returned home filled with new visions waiting to be drawn. As he grew in skill, powerful families of Florence began to notice him. They admired his art, his intelligence, and most of all, his imagination. He was invited to gatherings where scholars discussed mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and engineering late into the night. Leonardo listened more than he spoke, storing every insight in the endless library of his mind. Yet, even with recognition growing, he remained the same quiet observer. He didn't seek fame, he sought understanding. He believed that life was too precious to rush through, that every moment held a lesson if one paused long enough to hear it. One evening, after a long day of work, Leonardo lit a single candle and held his sketchbook close. His hands were tired, his mind weary. But as he stared at the blank page, a familiar spark stirred within him. Without thinking, he began drawing a new invention, a device that could measure time more accurately than sand or water. He didn't know if it would work, but that didn't matter. The joy was in the attempt. He reflected on his childhood in Vinci, the fields, the birds, the stars. and realized how those simple moments had built the foundation of his genius. Every whisper of wind, every ripple of water, every question he ever asked had shaped the man he had become. And now, standing on the threshold of greatness, Leonardo felt grateful for the quiet beginnings that set his imagination free. As dawn approached, Leonardo stepped outside and watched the sunrise paint Florence in shades of gold and amber. The city slowly awakened, unaware of the ideas forming inside one man's mind, ideas that would inspire generations long after he was gone. He breathed deeply, feeling both humbled and invigorated, knowing that his journey was far from over. And as the morning light settled softly over the rooftops, Leonardo whispered a promise into the fresh air, that he would never stop dreaming, never stop questioning, never stop creating. For in invention, he found not just purpose, but peace. As Leonardo's reputation spread across Florence, he received an invitation that would change the course of his destiny. The Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, requested his presence in one of the most powerful courts in Italy. The letter arrived sealed with deep red wax, its message both formal and promising. Leonardo felt a quiet stirring in his chest, an instinct that the next chapter of his life was waiting patiently beyond the hills. He traveled to Milan on horseback, moving through rolling landscapes that shifted from vineyards to forests to open fields. The journey was long and silent, giving him time to think. He imagined new inventions, drew rough sketches on scraps of parchment, and studied the way wind brushed through tall grass, noting how movement traveled in waves. This simple observation would later inspire mechanical designs that mimicked natural motion. When he arrived at the Duke's grand court, Leonardo was struck by the sheer scale of it. Towering stone walls, echoing halls, guards in polished armor, and tapestries that looked like woven stories. The air itself felt different, filled with ambition and power. For a moment, Leonardo felt small, but then he remembered the quiet voice inside him, the one that told him he belonged wherever curiosity could breathe. The Duke brought him into a room filled with military advisors, architects, and scholars. Leonardo was asked what he could offer Milan. Instead of speaking about paintings or sculptures, he spoke softly about machines that could strengthen armies, beautify cities, and educate generations. He talked about bridges that folded, cannons that reloaded efficiently, and canals that could transform trade. His ideas mesmerized the court. Leonardo soon became the Duke's trusted engineer and artist, a dual role that allowed his imagination to run free. Milan, a city of innovation, became his playground. He wandered through its streets at night, watching lanterns sway gently in the breeze, feeling the hum of life in every corner. He believed the city had its own heartbeat, and he grew determined to understand it. One of his greatest tasks was designing a massive equestrian statue, a bronze horse meant to honor the Duke's father. Leonardo studied horses obsessively. He visited stables at dawn, watching their muscles ripple beneath smooth coats, tracing the curves of their bodies with his eyes. The grace and strength of these animals filled him with awe, and he wanted the sculpture to capture that spirit. He created a giant clay model of the horse, towering in the courtyard, astonishing everyone who saw it. The lifelike details, the tense muscles, the fierce posture, the breath-like presence, were unlike anything Italy had witnessed. People traveled from distant towns just to see Leonardo's masterpiece. But war would later melt this dream away, and though the statue was never cast in bronze, its legend lived on for centuries. During his years in Milan, Leonardo also studied anatomy more intensely. He gained permission to examine the human body in ways no artist before him had dared. Late at night, with only a lantern flickering beside him, he mapped the hidden architecture of muscles and bones, discovering truths about the human form that would not be recognized by science until long after his death. He didn't see this work as morbid. He saw it as sacred. Every joint, every tendon, every delicate fold of tissue seemed like divine engineering, proof that the universe itself was an artist. He sketched page after page, filling notebooks with diagrams so precise they still astonish doctors today. Leonardo's curiosity extended to nature surrounding Milan. He would stand by rivers, watching water swirl into spirals, tracing its circular patterns. These patterns sparked ideas for water pumps, irrigation systems, and even defensive moats. To him, water was not just a resource, it was a living blueprint of motion and energy. He also experimented with musical inventions, crafting strange instruments with unusual shapes. Some produced haunting melodies, others soft chimes that sounded like wind whispering through metal. Music helped Leonardo relax, reminding him that beauty and science were simply different languages expressing the same truth. Despite his growing brilliance, Leonardo often felt overwhelmed by ideas. His notebooks were overflowing with sketches, half-finished concepts, and dreams he didn't have time to chase. Sometimes he feared he would leave the world with his imagination only half expressed. But instead of letting this fear stop him, he let it drive him further, working late into countless nights. One evening, while walking through Milan's gardens, he stopped before a quiet fountain. Water dripped steadily, each droplet catching candlelight from distant windows. The steady rhythm soothed him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, realizing that even if he never completed every invention, the act of dreaming was its own kind of creation. The Duke often asked for Leonardo's advice on architecture. Leonardo sketched grand designs for cathedrals and fortresses, each structure carefully balanced between strength and beauty. He believed that buildings should not dominate people, they should uplift them. His designs reflected harmony, symmetry, and a deep respect for nature's proportions. In the court, Leonardo became known not just for talent, but for kindness. He treated servants with respect, shared meals with guards, and listened patiently to musicians and scholars alike. People trusted him because he listened without judgment. In a world full of loud ambition, Leonardo's gentleness felt like a rare gift. He also studied the movement of wind. Climbing to rooftops late at night, he observed how fabric fluttered, how smoke curled upward, how rooftops shaped the flow of air. These studies helped him refine his flying machine designs, making them more realistic, more grounded in the physics of nature. Leonardo's mechanical knowledge grew so vast that he designed an early parachute concept, a triangular contraption meant to let a person descend safely from great heights. Though no one dared test it in his time, centuries later, someone did. And it worked exactly as Leonardo had predicted. His mind never stopped, not even in sleep. Dreams brought him visions of gears turning like constellations, of cities rising on mechanical frameworks, of people soaring above valleys with wings shaped like crescent moons. He would wake before sunrise, lighting a candle immediately to capture the fragments before they faded. During his time in Milan, Leonardo often visited a quiet chapel near the palace. Not for prayer, but for peace. He would sit in the cool stillness, listening to the faint echo of footsteps and the distant rhythm of life outside. These moments centered him, reminding him that even geniuses need silence. And in that silence, he conceived one of his most enduring masterpieces, The Last Supper. More than a painting, it was a story captured in a single moment, an emotional explosion frozen in time. Leonardo's understanding of human expression allowed him to fill the scene with tension, sorrow, confusion, and devotion all at once. Every face told a different story. As the years passed, Milan became more than a place of work. It became home. Leonardo felt his spirit growing in its streets, its gardens, its quiet corners. He knew his journey was far from over and that the world still held mysteries calling his name. And on one gentle night, as moonlight slipped through the palace windows, Leonardo stood alone in the courtyard, staring up at the sky. He wondered how many inventions were still hidden in the stars, waiting for someone brave enough to imagine them. He smiled softly, whispering to himself that he would keep searching for answers, for beauty, for possibility. As the political tides in Milan shifted, Leonardo found himself at a turning point. The once stable court grew tense with the threat of invasion, and whispers of war echoed through marble halls. Leonardo, who had always preferred harmony over conflict, began to feel the weight of uncertainty settling on his shoulders. Yet in this uneasy silence, he discovered a strange clarity, an understanding that even change carried its own kind of purpose. When the French army entered Milan, the city trembled. People hurried through streets with fear in their eyes, carrying few belongings. leaving behind memories they never thought they'd abandon. Leonardo, instead of panicking, moved slowly, observing the moment as though studying another chapter in the grand book of human experience. He believed that fear revealed truths bravery often hid. He left Milan reluctantly, traveling with a small group of assistants and notebooks filled with ideas still waiting to be born. The road ahead was uncertain, but he carried a familiar calm inside him. He had learned long ago that genius wasn't tied to a single city. It traveled with him, in his sketches, in his thoughts, in the quiet beat of his heart. During his journey, he passed through villages recovering from conflict. Children played in the ruins, making small games out of broken stones. Leonardo smiled, warmed by their innocence. He sketched them quietly, noting how even in destruction, life found a way to begin again. This realization stayed with him, reminding him that creation was always more powerful than war. He eventually reached Venice, a shimmering city floating on water like a dream. Gondolas glided through canals, reflecting lantern light across rippling surfaces. The city's rhythm felt both ancient and alive. Leonardo found inspiration in every corner: the curved bridges, the soft lapping of waves against stone, the elegant silhouettes of buildings rising from the sea. Venice requested his expertise for its defense, fearing invasion from rival states. Leonardo observed the tidal currents, studied sediment beneath the lagoon, and proposed systems built not just to protect the city, but to work in harmony with water itself. He believed that nature wasn't an enemy to fight, it was a partner to understand. During late nights along the Venetian docks, he watched fishermen mend their nets, weaving strands together with patience born from generations of practice. The rhythm reminded him of his own creative process, interlacing ideas, strengthening concepts, repairing weaknesses. Inspiration often came from the simplest tasks. He then traveled through the countryside once more, finding temporary refuge in quiet towns. One evening, while staying in a small inn, he met a young boy fascinated by his sketches. The boy asked shyly if inventions ever scared him, if dreaming so big ever felt lonely. Leonardo placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and told him that dreams were only frightening when one tried to ignore them. When embraced, they became a gift. This conversation lingered with him long after he left the town. It reminded him of his own childhood in Vinci, the fields, the birds, the open skies. He realized that the child he once was still lived inside him, guiding his hand with every new idea, reminding him that curiosity was timeless. Leonardo eventually reached Florence again, the city where his genius had first taken shape. But he wasn't the same young apprentice anymore. He had grown wiser, gentler, deeper. The familiar streets welcomed him like an old friend, and he resumed painting with a renewed sense of purpose. It was during this time that he began work on what would become the most famous portrait in history. He met a woman whose quiet smile held stories words could never tell. Her presence felt steady, grounded, yet mysteriously alive. Leonardo studied her expression for hours, how her lips curved with subtle grace, how her eyes shimmered with warmth, how her posture carried calm strength. This woman, Lisa, inspired him to paint not just a portrait, but a soul. He spent years perfecting the piece now known as the Mona Lisa, returning to it again and again, layering paint as gently as one might lay memories on a heart. He believed the painting would never truly be finished, because human emotion could never be captured entirely, not even by him. But perhaps that incompleteness made the work eternal. As time passed, Leonardo grew more introspective. He saw the world not as a stage for invention alone, but as a living miracle, full of quiet wonders waiting to be noticed. He took long walks along rivers, watching how light shifted across the water, how shadows changed personality with each passing hour. These simple observations fed his imagination more than any praise or recognition. In his later years, he accepted an invitation from the King of France, who admired him deeply and offered him a peaceful home to continue his work. Leonardo traveled north, feeling both nostalgic and hopeful. The French countryside was gentle, filled with rolling hills, blooming orchards, and soft breezes that carried the scent of spring. The king gave him a residence near the royal palace. a place where Leonardo could paint, design, dream, and teach without pressure. The tranquility healed parts of him he didn't realize were tired. For the first time in a long time, he felt completely free to explore his ideas without the noise of politics or war. On quiet afternoons, he sat beside a small pond near his home, dipping his fingers into the cool water, watching ripples expand in perfect circles. He found comfort in the pattern. How one small touch could affect so much around it. It reminded him that ideas worked the same way. A single thought could ripple through time, shaping futures he would never live to see. He spent his final years reflecting, writing, sketching, and mentoring young artists. His notebooks filled with new ideas, flying machines refined, architectural wonders reimagined, scientific studies expanded. Even near the end, his mind remained a constellation of possibilities. One spring evening, as golden light poured gently into his room, Leonardo felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He looked around at his sketches, his models, his endless pages filled with dreams. He realized he had spent his life not chasing perfection, but embracing curiosity. And in doing so, he had given the world a gift beyond measure. He leaned back, whispering to himself that beauty lived everywhere, in nature, in people, in the silent courage of those who dared to imagine. And in that calm, comforting quiet, he closed his eyes, his journey complete. But his legacy didn't fade. His ideas, like ripples on a pond, traveled through centuries, touching inventors, artists, dreamers, scientists, and storytellers. He had proven that imagination wasn't limited by time, place, or possibility. It was a flame that passed from one generation to the next. And tonight, as you listen to his story in the gentle hush of evening, with your headphones resting softly and the world growing quiet around you, remember this. Leonardo's greatest invention wasn't a machine or a painting. It was the belief that the human spirit is boundless, that there is always more to learn, more to create, more to dream. And perhaps, as you drift towards sleep, you can feel a little of his wonder too. Soft as moonlight, endless as the stars, waiting to inspire the next brilliant mind. Maybe yours. Subscribe to Sleepless Tales for more chilling stories, haunting mysteries, and endless nighttime adventures. Don't miss what comes next.